Armin, what exactly came out of these talks?
Well, there were some measures that were agreed, although it's still short on specifics, but they've been talking about reducing guard posts along this very heavily fortified border. They've talked about reducing equipment, and also there was a discussion about reducing tensions in the West Sea by stopping certain naval exercises and withdrawing artillery along the shore. Of course, all these things, Delano, stop well short of demilitarization. For that, there would have to be an actual peace treaty, and at the moment, well, since 1953, since the end of the war, there has been an armistice, but not a peace treaty. So at the moment, we're really seeing a continuation of the confidence-building measures that started earlier this year. Now the two sides are talking about jointly excavating the remains of soldiers who were killed in that war in the early 1950s. There's also still cooperation in sport, so kind of building on the spirit of the Winter Olympics when the North was invited to South Korea. So now you have joint canoeing teams, rowing teams, training, so things like that, but it's really a kind of continuation of that rather than a whole new level, because that kind of major breakthrough would presumably require real movement on the core issues, that's to say the North's nuclear weapons and the US military presence in South Korea.
Okay, so baby steps, if you will. Now, the United States has recently detected renewed activity at a missile factory in North Korea. Following on from that summit with Donald Trump, we really still don't know what Pyongyang is up to, Ralph.
No, well, there's obviously a lot of reason to be suspicious given North Korea's past behavior, particularly in the 90s, but I'll get back to that later. At the moment, what we're hearing is that U.S. Intelligence agencies have seen some sort of movement at a particular North Korean factory, which is supposedly the same one that made the first intercontinental ballistic missiles. Those ICBMs were said by North Korea to be capable of reaching the United States. And just last week, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, he said North Korea was continuing to make fuel for nuclear bombs. Now, all of this, to get back to the history a bit, Delano, in the 1990s, North Korea signed something called the Agreed Framework, but the US then, a few years later, accused North Korea of cheating on that, of secretly developing weapons-grade uranium, and as a result, a few years after that 1994 agreement, the US suspended oil shipments. So, as a result of this, of these reports in the Washington Post and elsewhere, there will obviously be suspicion in some quarters that North Korea may be repeating history again, perhaps deliberately deceiving the United States in order to get economic incentives, as it had in the 90s, to get oil shipments, to get its economic relief, while continuing with its nuclear activities.
We'll see what happens. Armin Georgian, thank you very much for that update.